Well, it's here, the brand new third generation 2024 Porsche Panamera. Porsche describes it as more digital, more luxurious, and more efficient, which all sound great, but what I'm trying to figure out is what's different about this new Panamera and how is it better? But before jumping into all of that, a big thank you to Porsche of downtown LA. As of the making of this video, they've got 4 of these in stock and plenty more coming. So if you're interested, make sure you reach out. So let's start exploring this, the brand new Porsche Panamera. All right, so let's start talking about this new Panamera with the different trim levels that are currently available. So you've got the Panamera, the base Panamera, the Panamera 4, which is the all-wheel drive version, the Panamera e-hybrid, the Panamera 4S e-hybrid, and the Turbo e-hybrid. This one we're looking at today is the base Panamera. And for those of you interested in the spec, let me show you what that looks like. You can see there, you can freeze frame it. Not the most drastically optioned car, but still nonetheless $125,000 from the $99,900 base price. And speaking of price, so these things, as you saw there, start at $99,000, and the high end, the Turbo e-hybrid model, go up to $191,000. So let's go ahead and start talking about the exterior now. Immediately, I noticed that there's different style headlights here. So they have a different shape, they're more angular than the prior generation, and all of the Panameras now come with standard LED matrix design headlights, and they are extremely cool looking. Next, there is a new opening here in the front fascia, right here. This line right there, that is for increased need of airflow, which is as a direct result of the performance gains that the new Panamera has gotten in this generation. Next, the rest of the front fascia. The air inlets look more pronounced and taller compared to the prior generation, and these LED running lights are now mounted vertically versus horizontally. Next, let's come around to the side, and the most distinguishable difference is the side air panel. Now, it's not really obvious in the black painted car, but it's more protruding. It sticks out much further compared to the prior generation car, and in my opinion, I think it looks nice, and it flows really nicely into the remaining body lines along the side of the Panamera. Now let's go out back where I see a new taillight design, definitely more futuristic looking, and actually it looks like it's drawing a lot of inspiration over from the Macan, or vice versa. I don't remember which one came out. The Panamera is drawing inspiration from the Macan, or the new Macan is drawing inspiration from the Panamera. Nonetheless, it looks a little different down here. Finally, making our way down the rest of the bumper here, these cuts are a lot more angular, a lot more apparent and aggressive looking, leading down into the familiar dual exit exhaust pipes. And these are the standard pipes. You can get the sport pipes, which gives you a quad tip setup. Now, this Panamera still very much looks like an evolution in design, but if I had to describe the new looks, I would say they look more muscular and boxy, while in the second generation, it was a little bit more sleeker, a little smoother looking in terms of body lines. What do you think? And now moving inside the new Panamera, there's a lot to cover here, but I do want to preface it by mentioning that this car is equipped with the extended leather trim in Bordeaux red. It's a $4,300 option, gives you beautiful stitching on the dash, on the doors, and it has a nice contrast of Bordeaux to black leather, so it's not really in your face, and it gives a great contrast to the black exterior paint. So nicely done. Now let's talk about that initial theme I mentioned at the outset, more digital. And I'm going to start by mentioning the screens, because now you can get 3 screens in the Panamera, and this follows to what the Taycan has been doing and what the Cayenne started doing in the 2024 model year. So starting out with the gauges out in front of you. So this is a 12.6-inch curved widescreen display. Gone is the analog tachometer from the prior generation. Boo, I know for some people that's going to be a downside, but this is a beautiful looking piece. And one thing you may notice is that it doesn't have a hood on top of it. And ultimately, it's not really a concern. As I drove this screen equipped in the Cayenne and in the Taycan, there's really no issue with any type of glare. Now, one additional bonus is that there's a lot of configurability with this gauge pod cluster. And the nice thing is you can have 5 pods, much like you can in the Porsche 911. The upside is that the outer gauge pods are not blocked by the steering wheel, much like they are in the 911. Now moving to the center screen, 10.9 inches here. It's a touch screen. It's running Porsche Communication Management System, PCM. I like PCM a lot, especially the later iterations of it, because they just get easier and easier and simpler to use. The system is responsive and the graphics are simple and modern looking. Now, the new shiny screen over on the passenger side. To be clear, this passenger screen is not standard. It costs $1,630 and it too is a 10.9-inch screen. The passenger has the ability to run various functions from this screen without having to use the center screen. And the screen itself has a privacy feature that restricts visibility from the driver's seat so you don't get distracted while you're behind the wheel. Next, the knob style ignition is gone and is now a push button start ignition system. The gear lever for the transmission was moved up onto the dash to declutter the center area here. And speaking of the center area, it is now much simpler and much cleaner looking. A drastic reduction of buttons. All I see are climate control switches, a volume knob, and some air vents. And speaking of those air vents, they are still controlled from within the infotainment system. Some people find this weird, but hey, it's still a carryover from the second generation. Finally, let's talk about the overall size here. This feels very much like the second generation car. Now, the seat I'm sitting in, the base seat is a 14-way seat. It's a very comfortable seat, heated, cooled, and this example is equipped with the massaging seats. Those work wonderfully. They're controlled from inside of PCM, and it's just a nice seat to sit in, very comfortable. The heated seats work well, the cool seats work well, and the massaging does as well. Very nice seat. I would be interested to see what the 18-way looks like, but the 14-way is very comfortable. All right, now the back seats, and let's start out by talking about the basics, the overall size and comfort. So sitting behind myself at 5'11", I have plenty of leg room. My hair is not touching the ceiling, so somebody an inch or two taller than I am is going to fit in here as well. And in reality, the headroom is the limiting factor here. There's plenty of leg room. Now, in terms of overall space, so the Panamera continues to be a 4-seater configuration. However, Porsche is still offering a 2+1 style seating configuration. So you do have an additional seat back here, and I believe that's less than $1,000 for that option, which in my opinion is a no-brainer. But nonetheless, it gives you 5 passenger occupancy in your Panamera. Now let's move on to some more detailed items, some creature comforts as well. So these seats are heated and they are very, very comfortable, and they're really nice to sit in. I can just sit back here all day. Now, in terms of climate control, so this is a 4 climate control zone car, and the interesting thing is that you continue to have fixed vents here, but in the back seats, you have a physical vent that you can adjust outside of the infotainment system, while the front passengers just have to make do with doing everything inside the infotainment system. It's quite interesting. I wonder why that is in the back seat, but nonetheless, it's something I noticed. Now, talking about that screen, the infotainment system, at least in the back seat area here, you can control navigation, you can control your media, but the coolest thing is cockpit view. So when you click on this, it gives you basically the readout of what the driver is seeing in the gauge cluster. So you have the G meter in the back, you have a compass, and you can even see how fast the car is going. Now, if it was me and I was sitting in the back seats, I mean, I would be in cockpit view the entire time. And credit to Porsche, they put 2 charging ports in the back seats. Nowadays it's very important. You got kids, tablets, adults with long road trips. You need the ability to charge your connected devices in the back seat area. There are cup holders hidden underneath this piano black plastic trim, and of course an armrest that is decently cushioned with some additional storage. So that's pretty much it for the back seats. Now let's move to the cargo space, look at the trunk, and then take it out for a quick spin. And now exploring the cargo space, you can open the trunk using the kicking motion right here underneath the front bumper. And there's also comfort access right underneath the Panamera badge. And the electric tailgate will open. I've left my small to medium size camera bag right there for reference, but there is 17 cubic feet of space in the back of the Panamera. And if you would like to, you can extend it by lowering the rear seats, and that'll give you 46 cubic feet of space. Now, even with the rear seats up, I don't see any issues in terms of weekend getaway, as you can probably fit 2 larger pieces of suitcases back here, and day-to-day traveling and day-to-day usability should also not be an issue for the Panamera. In terms of closing the trunk, as I mentioned, it's electronic. This button will close it, this button will close it and lock the doors. You get a beeping sound, and that's the trunk of the new Panamera. So now let's talk about the mechanical updates the Panamera gets, starting out with the engine. So the Panamera and the Panamera 4 are going to be equipped with a 2.9 liter turbocharged V6 that generates 348 horsepower and 368 pound-feet of torque. Now, if you're keeping track, that's 23 additional horsepower and 37 additional pounds-feet of torque from the prior generation. All Panameras are now equipped with a 8-speed PDK automatic transmission or double clutch transmission. And this specific model, the Panamera, the base one, gets 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. And if you opt for the Panamera 4 all-wheel drive, drops down to 4.7. So let's also talk a little bit about the e-hybrid. And as I mentioned at the outset, Porsche is going to have 4 different configurations of e-hybrid. And specifically, let's talk about the battery, because not all the details are known yet, but the battery capacity is the motor capacity is 140 kilowatts, and the battery capacity is 25.7. Now, Porsche hasn't mentioned anything about range, but they did mention that there is an increase compared to the prior generation. And of course, the top of the line turbo trim right now generates 670 combined horsepower with the battery, and a 0 to 60 time of 3 seconds, if I remember correctly. Now, the real trick stuff that's happening is underneath the skin with the suspension of the new Panamera. So all Panameras now come with a dual chamber air suspension with PASM. The 2-chamber part means that it gives it a bigger bandwidth between comfort and sport. Now, the real wizardry is called Porsche Active Ride, which is only available on the e-hybrid models because it requires the extra juice from the e-hybrid battery. So it has the ability to basically keep the Panamera flat in various driving situations. For example, it will create opposing forces when you're braking or accelerating to keep the car flat. Now, obviously, this suspension will have benefits on a track, but a more practical use case would be in a daily driving situation where you've got a hot cup of coffee and you come to a sudden stop. Technically, this thing should prevent you from spilling coffee all over yourself, which will further lead you to thanking yourself for checking the $7,000 box for Porsche Active Ride. Now let's take this thing out on the road and see what it drives like. So now inside the new Panamera, let's go ahead and turn this thing on. Start stop is on the left, and it's a button now. Let's do a quick exhaust check. We are now in normal. This is what it sounds like. There's a rev limiter, 3,000 RPM. Won't let me go more than that. Let's do a sport run. So now in sport, sounds about the same. Under 3,000 RPM, not really gonna be able to tell the difference. All right, so let's roll. Let's see what this Panamera is about. And as I clicked that the transmission controller here, I remember the first time I got into the Taycan, I was like, where is the shifter? And then I noticed it was up here on the dash. It took me like a minute, and then you get used to it. So if you've never driven a Taycan or the new Cayenne, you're gonna come in here and you're like, where's the shifter? And it's right here up on the dash. So kind of something to get used to, but nonetheless, let's go ahead and put it in sport. So sport in drive mode, sport chassis, car in its, what the heck, let's go in its lowest setting, which is called low. And I'm not really gonna hammer this thing. It's a brand new car. It has 21 miles on it. Just to get a feel for what it feels like, let's go ahead and drop it to first gear and put it in manual shift mode. And okay, all right, no shortage of power here, and I'm not really mashing it too hard, just to get a sense of what this thing feels like. PDK, not surprised, feels wonderful. Okay, that was a red line pull. All right, yeah, I mean, no shortage of power here in the base Panamera. This thing feels more than powerful enough to drive on a daily basis, to merge onto the freeway, for stop and go traffic, passing, all of that stuff. There's more than enough power, 348 horsepower, 368 pounds-feet of torque. You're not gonna feel a shortage of speed or acceleration in this car. It's more than adequate. Now let's go ahead and put it back in normal mode, which is what most people are gonna use this thing in this drive mode. So let me tell you about the transmission. I briefly mentioned it here. 8-speed PDK. It's not the 7-speed. This is the newest generation, and it's in the 911, and it's wonderful there. It's also wonderful here. No surprise. Up shifts, down shifts, whether you're shifting, whether it's shifting, it does a fantastic job of making it feel seamless. You don't feel the shifts except for when you're kind of in sport mode, and it kind of dials in a little bit more feel. But it's a wonderful transmission. It is the de facto and the leader in terms of double clutch transmission, the PDK from Porsche. Now, the other item I wanted to cover is the suspension. So this is the standard PASM air shock suspension, and it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of machinery. So I'm going to cover the two broad ends of the spectrum and one last character, so three kind of settings. So speaking of settings, there's so many things you can mess around with. So you've got the drive mode. You can do that in normal or in sport, and then specific to the chassis, you have chassis settings, which are normal, sport, and sport plus, and then you have the ride, which there's 4 of. There's lift, normal, lowered, and then low. And let me cover, like I said, the broad ends of the spectrum. So normal everything, chassis normal, drive mode normal, and ride height normal. Sublime. Wonderful to drive on a daily basis, soaks up all of the bumps. It does a good job of trying to really keep that comfort level that you're really looking for in a executive sedan like the Panamera. And it's, I mean, I gotta say, it's not as good as like a 7 Series or a Mercedes S-Class. And personally, I don't think Porsche is trying to do that, because this is a little different car. They're aiming at a different audience or a different type of character in terms of driving. But for what it is, a Porsche product with that sportiness, it's wonderful. Now, touching on sportiness, the other end of the spectrum here is sport everything and in its lowest ride height. It does stiffen up. When the car lowers, you can absolutely sense that it is sitting lower. It gives it that sporty dynamic. And touching on that character I was just talking about earlier, where Porsche is not really trying to make this an all-out luxury fluff box, for the lack of a better term. This is still supposed to be a Porsche product, and you're still supposed to feel sportiness in the driving characteristics. I did give it a little nudge prior to filming this, and I can say that the steering does stiffen up, but it is natural. It's not artificial. Porsche's steering rack is very good, and in addition to that, it does a good job for what it is. Yes, this is still a very big, very heavy sedan, and granted that it is that, it still gives you a lot of sporty feedback. It maintains its Porsche dynamic. But overall, this thing feels wonderful. It's a typical Porsche new generation. 5% here, 10% improvement here, 15% improvement here. The interior is vastly improved and up to date with what Porsche is doing with a lot of their newer products. And of course, this being a flagship Porsche product in terms of non-911s. It's got all the bells and whistles. You've got the ability to get the third screen in here now. And I'm happy to say that it's still a Porsche product with all of the suspension improvements and all of these things that Porsche is trying to do to make it feel more luxurious and more comfortable. It still remains a Porsche product. It still remains a Panamera, which is a sporty sedan. So that's pretty much all I've got in terms of driving. Now let's go ahead and wrap it up with some final thoughts. And that's the third generation Porsche Panamera. Now, I always liked the Panamera, and this new generation doesn't really change my perspective. It remains the only choice if you're looking for a full-size executive sedan that has a sporty edge. And the reason I say that is because the competition, like the Mercedes S-Class or the BMW 7 Series, have pretty much shifted all of their focus to luxury and technology. And even though the full-size executive sedan market has gone down in popularity, I'm glad to see that Porsche continues to improve upon the Panamera platform. Overall, I really like it. Now, if you happen to be interested in a second generation Panamera, here are a couple links to some reviews I've done in the past. Another thank you to Porsche of downtown LA. And if you have any more questions related to the third generation, please feel free to leave me a comment down below in this video or send me a message on Instagram. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.